Hello and welcome to today's Rocksmith developer stream. I am your host, Doug Lilly. I'm also the community developer here at Rocksmith, and today I will be the performer. We're gonna talk about music. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna see some songs we played. We're gonna have a little bit of an educational moment later on the stream. As always, we're gonna have raffles, and if you have questions, please let us know. UbiVertigo is in the chat. That is Brian Turner. He is our community manager based in North Carolina. And if there's anything that you want to know from myself, from our guest today, just let us know. Let him know. Tag UbiVertigo in the chat, and he'll get those questions to us. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about solos. And to have that conversation, I would like to now introduce our guests for today. Welcome, gentlemen. Today, we have Mr. Greg Studley and Anthony Martinez. Greg is a musical content developer here at Rocksmith, and Anthony Martinez is the manager of musical content. Gentlemen, welcome today.
Thanks,
Hello.
Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Anthony, this is your first time back on the stream since we have been at home.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It feels great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nice. It's very nice to have you. Greg, we've seen you.
Yeah, you know, I've been
It's
here.
nice. It's always nice to have you. It's always
but now I'm here live. Normally I'm here from a few days ago.
True. That's very true. It's nice to have you in the chat. So I had the two of you here. I was thinking about what we might talk about, and I believe both of us have had conversations in the past about solos. So today we're going to talk about guitar solos, and I gave you a little bit of prep this week, and I want to know. I want the chat to be able to know, what are your 3 favorite guitar solos? We'll start with Greg Studley.
Oh wait, I have to do 3? Oh, I got to narrow it down. All right.
I know you wrote. You both sent me 4 when I explicitly asked for 3. So you're gonna have to go. No.
And then we added a 5th
and then
one
I sent
too.
you another one, so it ended up being 5.
They're just top 5. Top 5. You know what? The structure here is very loose. So top 5 is fine.
Let's go top 5, because otherwise I gotta narrow it down. Okay, so I want to preface that I really feel like a solid guitar solo is not just about the solo. It's if the solo fits within the context of the song, and that holds so much value about what the solo is going to sound like. So I just had to say that, because some of this might be like, well, that's an interesting pick, but remember that it's all about how well it fits within the tune that it exists in. So top 5 in no particular order. I am going to go with Stevie Ray Vaughan's Scuttlebutton, Wes Montgomery's West Coast Blues, because man, that is just a great way to play jazz. Al Di Meola's Mediterranean Sundance, which there's an absolutely killer, amazing version of that song that was done as a Friday Night in San Francisco trio with Al Di Meola and Paco de Lucia, and also, who was it? Somebody fill in the blank for me.
I could check chat, but it'll be a few seconds.
Yeah, okay, and you know,
McLaughlin?
Thank you, and John McLaughlin, yes. A killer version, by the way, if you haven't heard it. Jimmy Herring is one of my favorite guitar players. He has a great solo in one of his original songs called Lifeboat. And then lastly, I do have to pick it because it is one of the songs where it's just the perfect melody all the way through, is Pink Floyd's Comfortably Numb, with David Gilmour playing.
And I know you mentioned that they are your favorite solos due to their context within the song as a whole, and that's a topic that I want to dive into a little bit later. But are there any specifics? And I know this is such an ephemeral thing, but are there moments? Are there ebbs and flows that you can talk about in any of those solos that make them favorite?
Certainly. I mean, if we talk about Wes Montgomery's solo in West Coast Blues, it evolves in a way where each time he's cycling through the chord progression, he's got like a specific element of playing that he's focused on. There's one section of the solo where he's really focusing on doing slides. And then later on, as is traditional for Wes Montgomery, he goes into doing an octave solo, where he's just playing octaves around the neck. But in doing that, he's kind of saying, okay, these are the techniques that I want to, well, probably not I want to show off, but that I'm using. But then he actually evolves with them, rather than just being like, oh, here's a little thing on octaves, now I'm going to move on. he really like milks each part of it so that you really get a kind of a solo in itself of that particular style that he's showing off, which is really a cool thing. It makes it so it all has to do with itself. It's not random at that point. It really does go from, okay, this is my idea, now I'm moving over to this one, and it really puts it into a nice flow from start to finish.
Cool. Thank you, Greg. And Anthony, let's talk about your favorite guitar solos.
Yeah, it was really tough to narrow this list down, but we can start with these 5. I'll kick it off with Killer Queen. Okay. Brian May's solo in Killer Queen is one of my favorites, period. And actually, it was released, Killer Queen was released in a Queen 5-pack during the RS1 DLC days back in 2012, so it's available to play in game. Yeah, I mean, I love how Brian May's solo enters the song. It enters the picture just after, I think, the second chorus, and the transition is just seamless. It's kind of as if Brian May, his guitar work takes over for Freddie's vocals. And the guitar work is just as beautifully expressive and melodic as Freddie's vocal work, and like Freddie's voice, Brian May's guitar has its own signature sound, right? Its own amazing tone. When you know it, when you hear it, you know it, right? Yeah, I mean, the solo occurs right after the second chorus, and it's pretty much only the beginning. He takes a very lyrical approach and sort of mimics previous melodies sung by Freddie, and then he sets himself up for the following verse, where he just sort of makes it his own thing, and he punches in different guitar harmonies. And there's sort of like a call and response figure that happens throughout, which is great. And at this point in the solo too, his guitar is front and center. And right. We talked some about how band members might set up solos, for the lead or the any soloist in the band. But I think it's also important to mention how engineers can also
sure.
Highlight solos in the mixes they produce for records. And I think that that's certainly at play here with this song. It's fun to play. There are a lot of very expressive bends coupled with vibrato, some nice slides, and Brian May's killer guitar tone.
Right.
And so yeah, that's number 1 on my list. Number 2, unfortunately, does not currently exist in the Rocksmith library, but it's one of my favorites of all time. It's Clapton's solos or soli in "While My Guitar Gently Weeps." I've always loved this song. I think it's beautifully written, lyrically as well as just musically. And the White Album is one of my favorite records. I think for starters, the solo sits on top of a really cool chord progression, and it's very similar to the one that exists at the beginning of 25 or 6 to 4, right? You start on A, go down to G, and then there's that descending pattern, F sharp, F, and it just creates a really cool rock sound in minor. But I love the bluesy, very expressive bends with vibrato, and I feel that Clapton does a really good job of playing with space. He's not verbose with his playing, I think, in general. I mean, maybe during the Cream days he went a little more crazy, but in this particular song, I feel that he serves the music well. And one thing that I really like about this song too, and this is something that I've talked with Dan Amrich about a bunch, it's the live performance of "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" at the 2004 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony that features, that awesome guitar solo by Prince at the very end. And by end, I mean like the final 3 minutes of that performance. He gives a nod to the original, composed solo, but certainly makes it his own. and throws in a lot of really cool rock guitar techniques, like staple licks that you would hear in a lot of famous rock songs. But to me, it's one of those songs that just inspires people to, create their own versions of it, and have fun with jamming over that progression.
Sure.
Yeah. Tornado of Souls is number 3 on my list. And I think for obvious reasons. So I note tracked this song back in, I think it was at the end of 2015, and then we released I think it was Megadeth 2 at the start of 2016, and I wasn't ready to play the lead arrangement because it was just beyond my skill set, outside of my wheelhouse for sure, but I loved the song, and I grew to love it through note tracking it. And I had made a comment on that stream where I said that I was going to learn the lead guitar chart in time to play it at the holiday stream that year. And community members who watched on the stream reminded me of that throughout the year. And so there was no getting out of it. I worked at it, and I kind of formed a really cool relationship with it. And I just love how technical it is. Right out the gate, the song is just fast and energetic, and for me at least, technically challenging. But the Marty Friedman starts off kind of nice and slow, at least so lead wise, and it eventually builds it up and plays a lot of really cool like sweeps, a lot of sweep arpeggios, and he's just an amazing player. It's one of my favorite solos, man. Don't mean to hog this time. Is it okay if I go on?
Please do.
Let's see here. Number 4 on my list is actually an Earth, Wind, and Fire song called "That's the Way of the World." I believe it's Al McKay who is the guitarist who plays the solo in that song. And to piggyback on what Greg said, this guy just serves the song so well by playing in the pocket and being very selective with his note choices and his rhythmic phrasing as well. He really lays out. He allows the listener to just enjoy the groove, because I think that's what it's all about with this band. And so everything that he plays definitely matters because he plays so sparingly during the solo section. It's become one of my favorites. It's one of those kind of like a Brian May solo where you can just sing it because it's so melodic and catchy. It features a lot of hooks. But yeah, very tasteful playing.
Cool. We were talking about. Sorry, you had one more song. I just cut you off.
It was "Don't Speak" by No Doubt, right. And I love the acoustic guitar solo in the middle that occurs in the bridge. It's beautifully written, beautifully played, and I think in a live setting, the guitarist actually has an acoustic guitar waiting for him, like propped up. So when it comes time to play the solo, he just moves his electric guitar around, walks up to the acoustic, and plays it as it sounds on the record.
I think the fact that they use the acoustic actually goes a long way, especially in that song, to kind of make that more memorable, because you're not really expecting to hear an acoustic mid-song, and then it just takes center stage in a really cool way. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like some nice, sweeps or like rakes in there. Just very tasteful playing. It's very delicate, and it really sets the tone nicely.
So let's take a pretty big step back. Why are solos? Why do we have solos in songs? When you're writing a song, why do you put a solo in a song? We'll start with.
I can't think of any reasons why.
Greg, what do you?
We'll let Greg think about
it. Why? Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think it's an opportunity to shape the song, to set to help complement the mood of the song, to help deliver a message. What is the song trying to express, and how does the solo fulfill that? How does the solo relay that message? And it kind of goes back to the question of, how do you compose a solo in the first place? What's your approach for doing that? And I think it just depends on the musical situation, the musical context. But it's and why solos exist. I think it's just it depends. To put it simply.
I mean, I guess there's structural reasons. There could be showing off reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why not, right? You've got these licks, you want to play them. They might not make a riff. They might not make for like a good verse or chorus, but I can play with it in the solo and kind of see where it goes.
Yeah. I think it also kind of has a similar value to a bridge. I mean, if you think about what's the function of a bridge in a song, and it's to give the listener something that they haven't heard before. They've heard verses, but they've heard choruses, and at that point you're kind of like, well, I'm just going to keep repeating sections that the listener is familiar with. Even if you change the words in the verse, that still sounds very familiar when you come back to a verse. But you throw in a bridge, and all of a sudden the listener gets usually a new chord progression, a new melody that the vocalist is doing that goes over that chord progression. But the cool thing is when you go into a solo section, you give the listener something completely different normally, which you might even have the same chord progression, but the focal point of the music is no longer the vocals. And that actually, I think, really opens up the song to give the listener something to latch on to that's actually very different than what they've heard previously. It's kind of like when you hear solos at the end of songs, I feel like it serves the same purpose. You could put a bunch of choruses at the end, but when you do one of those like fade out guitar solos, you're giving the listener new information that they didn't get earlier in the song, and actually new focal point being the instrument that's soloing.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you. I've got one question I wanted to ask from the chat before we start our first raffle. This one is from Tone Wolf FFIO, which I say FFIO every time. I know it's not pronounced that way, or is it? And I ask the question every time. I apologize. Moving on. What is considered a solo? Why is a post-chorus or pre-verse not a solo? And we can throw in bridge there if the bridge is different enough and features the guitar enough. What makes a solo and not something else?
I'd normally label a solo section as kind of like, it could be potentially interpreted as like an interlude, because solos normally are referred to as instrumental sections. Mm-hmm. Interesting though, interludes normally would refer to sections where the parts are more composed and structured, where there's like a melody that when you would, for example, if you were to go and see the band play live, they probably would emulate that exact interlude the same way. And it's just like a musical break. But a solo really showcases one particular instrument from the group. And a lot of times when you go and see that band play live, they'll change things about that solo section rather than play it exactly as recorded. So I'd probably use that as kind of the defining element.
Okay. Anthony, do you have any, do you disagree? Are you on board with that assessment?
Please don't.
No, because Greg said please. I don't.
Okay.
No. Yeah. I think that's spot on. I think that's totally fair. And I like what Greg said about offering listeners something new, right? And consider "Smells Like Teen Spirit" and the guitar solo in that song, which is just the vocal melody, but it's presented in a different context. It's distorted guitar with these really cool bends. It's kind of repackaged, to sort of place emphasis on the vocal hook. And that's what can make a song memorable, right? Something that you can sing along with.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you both very much. Right now, we're gonna step away for a moment. We will see Anthony and Greg again very soon. But right now, we are going to give away our first Ernie Ball prize pack of the day. So if you're in the chat live right now, please look for UB Jurassic's instructions on how you can win everything that you see on your screen. You're going to get a couple of sets of guitar strings, one for your 6-string, one for your 4-string bass. You will get a peg winder from Ernie Ball. You will get a package of Ernie Ball Wonder Wipes, as well as a dozen picks from Ernie Ball and 3 picks from us here at Rocksmith. We are shipping internationally when we ship. Once more, we are not yet in the office, so we are holding on to these prizes until we can ship all of them together. We do ship internationally, but if you are international, please break up your address line by line so that I can get that to you as efficiently and quickly as possible. And good luck. Right now, we are going to take a look at our performer for this week, which is me. So I'll be playing bass on a couple songs. We're gonna do one, and then I'll come back for a minute, and we'll do another one. I'm not gonna introduce myself. It's me. It's Doug. I guess I did. I messed it up. I introduced myself. Let's hit it. I'll see you in a minute live.
Hi everybody. It's me again, Doug. I'm your guest today, guest performer as well as your host. So I'm happy to play a couple songs today. I wanted to investigate 2 songs that I discovered in Rocksmith. These are songs that I was not aware of necessarily. The bands I may have been sort of vaguely aware of, but hadn't listened to, had not played, of course. And these are 2 songs that I've grown to like a lot. First up is Crowbot. The whole Crowbot pack is incredibly fun for me to play. A lot of that pentatonic groove. And the groove is really what I'm focused on here. Just finding the sweet spot and that little space and time where you can either nail it and be in the groove or just miss it and completely wreck the whole thing. So hopefully I won't wreck anything, and we'll do a little fly on the wall. Here you go. Robot, fly on the wall. It's fun. Enjoy.
Flawless performance.
And we are back live. Thank you to me for playing that song, and to thank everybody for sitting through that. Let's have a song pack giveaway. Why don't we? This week we're gonna give away 5 copies of the Skater Rock song pack on Steam. So if you're in the chat live right now, please look for UB Jurassic's instructions on how you can win one of 5 copies of the Skater Rock song pack on Steam. That song pack includes You by Bad Religion, Superman by Goldfinger, May 16 by Lagwagon, No Cigar by Millencolin, and When Worlds Collide by Powerman 5000, or as I like to call him, Powerman 5000. Brother of Rob Zombie, I believe. Spider Zombie? I don't know if Spider's last name was Zombie or if he just went by Spider. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. Anyway, good luck on that. Right now, we are going to skip right ahead to the next performance, which is again me. This time, you know what? It's been so long, I forgot what I played. It's right in front of me. Two Door Cinema Club. What you know. And while you're there, make sure you are sending any questions that you might have to UB Jurassic. Maybe save it for after the raffle. It might get a little bit messy. They might get missed if it's going on while the chat is spinning with raffles. But good luck on that. And yeah, send us your questions. Here's me, and then we're going to hear from Brian Turner himself, and then back with Anthony Martinez and Greg Sully to continue talking about solos.
And next up, we have Two Door Cinema Club with What Do You Know? Now, this is another group that I was not familiar with before I started in Rocksmith, but this song is super catchy. The bass line super funky and picked, which is honestly surprising for this type of bass line, but it works. It adds that little bit of punch, and it feels, unlike the last song that I played, the Crowbot song, where it feels like you want to be just behind the beat. With this one, you're really pushing, and I want to be just ahead of the beat as much as I can. But it's a fun song, and I'm going to play it. Don't need this.
In a few weeks, I will get time to realize it's right before my eyes, and I can take it if it's what I want to do. I am leaving, and this is starting to feel like it's right before my eyes, and I can taste it. It's my sweet beginning. I can tell just what you want. You don't want to be alone. You don't want to be alone. I can say it's what you know.
masterful performance.
Hey everyone, it's Brian Turner, your Rocksmith community manager, and today I'm here to talk about a little piece of gear that's underrated but probably a little daunting to do because it involves putting some holes into your wall. So last time you saw me, I was on the stream, I was holding quite a few guitars and had a very vacant back wall. So to solve that problem, I bought myself the Hercules Auto Grip wall mount. The guitar mount itself is actually a pretty simple piece of gear. When the guitar is resting on the mount, its weight locks it into place and keeps it nice and secure. But when you lift the guitar, the mount unlocks and allows you to freely access your guitar and get it off the mount. Now, by itself, it's a pretty simple piece of gear. But the more daunting part about this is the fact that you have to install it directly to your wall, which can be difficult depending on where you live. So what you want to do is find a nice, sturdy place to put your guitar mount. Wood and brick are both very good options and very sturdy, considering you're going to be putting a lot of weight on this guitar mount. Now, in my case, I'm surrounded by a bunch of drywall, so that makes it a little more difficult. Drywall is nice and soft, and if you try and put the guitar mount directly on it, it's going to end up ruining your wall and possibly your guitar. So I'm going to go ahead and say this again. Never mount your guitar to just drywall. What you're going to want to do is find a stud inside of your wall, which you can find with one of these, a stud finder. The stud finder itself is pretty cheap and easy to use. Simply set it on the wall, press the side button, and then slowly guide it across the wall until it starts beeping. Once it starts beeping, you found the stud, and that's exactly where you want to put your guitar mount. Now the Hercules guitar mount itself came with 3 screws, but I didn't feel they were long enough to get a nice secure fit to the stud in my wall. So I went to the hardware store and got some nice long, thick screws that allowed me to get a more secure fit to the wall. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to use those screws for all 3 because the width of my stud wasn't all that large to encompass for the entire guitar mount. So for the sides, I've used drywall anchors to give it nice support. Again, you would not want to use drywall anchors for all 3. You would probably end up ruining your drywall. So when you're looking to actually put these into the wall, you can drill them, but preferably you would want to screw drive them in to avoid any damage to the wall. You want to take it nice and slow. But if you're going to use a drill, again, take it nice and slow. You do not want to damage your wall. But once you're done, you got a nice decoration for your blank wall. Or at least I do it. So that's going to be it from me. I hope you guys are all staying safe, and I'll see you soon.
And thank you very much, Brian Turner. And we are back live. And let's go ahead and say hello once more to our guests for today, Anthony Martinez and Greg Studley. And I, of course, Doug Lilly, your host and community developer. Welcome back, guys.
Happy to be here. I'm glad that Brian found me.
Yeah, right. I told people in the chat that you kept talking about yourself throughout that entire segment.
Hey man, I'm not going to put 2 videos of myself up on the stream today, okay?
That's fine. I don't know who we're talking about. Solos. We're talking about guitar solos. Let's talk for a moment about non-conventional guitar solos. I had asked you if you wouldn't mind preparing your favorite non-conventional guitar solo. So let's hear what those are and why they're not conventional. Let's start this time with Greg Studley.
When did you ask us that?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I have no memory, but I can do it.
It was in the email.
But
Yeah,
I have no memory of this at all.
I did see it as like an optional, like we can maybe talk about some unconventional solos.
Oh, it was on a bullet point.
All right, I've got one.
Sure. Anthony can research in the meantime.
I am gonna have to go Pink Floyd on this one because I think it suits the bill pretty well. So on the Pink Floyd album Animals, there's a song called Pigs. Technically there's 3 of them, so there's a song right in the middle of the album called Pigs, 3 different ones. And the middle guitar solo of the song, because there's one in the middle and there's one at the end, the middle guitar solo of the song, David Gilmour uses a talk box, but he uses it in a way that it sounds kind of like a pig, because he's playing all these low notes, and the way he's moving his mouth around actually starts to emulate the animal for which the song is about. So I'd have to actually cite that one, because when you get to that part of the song, it doesn't sound like what you would normally picture. Hey, here's a guitar solo. It more sounds like here's some interesting sounds that fit the song.
Right. That which is sort of that's I think something that Nine Inch Nails did later on, where it's not so much about like shredding or necessarily like technical proficiency. It's creating like an uncomfortable atmosphere using unusual sounds that you wouldn't necessarily recognize from most songs.
Yeah, and a talk box is great for doing that, because a talk box, you can really change the sound of your instrument with that device. Pretty cool stuff.
Have you ever messed with one? I've never had the opportunity.
They're fun. The two biggest ways I'd say you can actually change the sound of your guitar are a talk box and running it through something that it would like synth it.
Okay,
so you see like a synth guitar, because then you can make it sound like pretty much anything you want.
Right.
Those are two fun things to work with, though. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And Anthony Martinez, what is your favorite unconventional solo? And we'll talk about what that means, what that could mean after this.
Sure. Let me just wrap up my research here.
Sure.
So yeah, when Greg touched on the idea of creating like an interesting sonic soundscape, right? I immediately thought of Mr. Greenwood, Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, and Paranoid Android, and the guitar work in that, which is awesome, right? And just so bizarre sounding at the same time, which made it very difficult for me to transcribe back when I worked on it. But I think that's very unconventional in terms of like the qualities of sounds that he produced for it. It's kind of gripping in this dark, almost like uncomfortable way. Just compelling, at the same time. And I'm still not entirely sure about which effects he used for it, but I know that Brendan did a good job of emulating those effects in game.
Okay. And what would you consider the purpose? Why would you go for an unconventional solo? And how are we defining an unconventional solo? I realize I'm the one who asked the question, and I should be the one to define it, but I think it's more fun if you define it. Unconventional solos, how would you define those? What is the point of them? This time, Anthony Martinez, you're on the spot.
Yeah, maybe just to throw listeners off a little bit, to create maybe in the case of like a Radiohead song, and an uncomfortable mood, something to think about and just experience, something that's different, a sound or like a solo you might not hear on, like in a top 40 playlist on the radio.
Sure.
It's just, I think, an opportunity to think creatively, just compose something outside the box and explore,
And Greg Studley?
Well, okay, so I'm going to backtrack one thing, because someone, I was reading through the chat, and someone also mentioned, which I think is even a better example than what I said. Somebody mentioned Elephant Talk by King Crimson, which even more so explains how you can turn a guitar into sounding like literally a creature. So what creates an unconventional solo then? I think when you can get the guitar away from the sound of playing notes and turn it more into a general sound device that isn't actually based on this 12-tone scale, then you can start to do that. But
I feel like we should definitely mention Tom Morello at this point.
Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, when you're locked into a 12-tone system, meaning like you're playing the notes on the frets and that's your device, it's going to sound musical. When you start getting away from that, and that could be using your whammy bar, that could be using external devices like a talk box, like I was saying, or like Tom Morello does, and making his guitar just create these awesome sounds using a cut switch. I mean, all of this gets you outside of that normal range of playing and gets you into that realm of more just sound more than notes.
Or even just rhythms, right? Different rhythmic patterns that you can feel and groove to, or just experience in a different way.
Not even be able to groove to, but yes.
Yeah, or if it's possibly, I guess it depends on how sort of experimental you want to get. I mean, you could have a guitar solo that's just one note played in different rhythms, maybe with a couple of different sounds, optionally. But speaking of making a solo, let's talk about the craft of building solos. Now, Greg Studley, you've helped us with several videos now where you've gone over guitar solos in game from songs that our performers are playing and shown how you might change it up, how you might build your own solo using those mechanics. So if you don't mind, briefly, what are the highlight notes of building a structured solo?
Sure. I'd say in its simplest form, the main thing you have to do is understand the groove of the song. So if a song is primarily using like 16th note divisions of the beat, then you don't want to make your entire solo based upon triplets, which are divisions of 3 in the beat, because those two things aren't going to mesh. So one element needs to fit the other for it to be very listenable. I'll say it doesn't mean you couldn't do that, but it would be a little bit more of a juxtaposition of rhythms over each other.
You have to work with that transition.
Yes.
You have to build to it. Yeah.
And the other thing is you need to understand exactly the structure of what you're playing over. So a great example would be like a 12-bar blues. So if you play in ideas that are 4 measures long, kind of think about it like you get 3 ideas per chord progression, because you take that and you can make 12 bars out of it. And so if you don't like structure your ideas in a way that's going to make sense against the number of measures, then it actually isn't going to sound like it makes a lot of sense with the song. It could sound fine on its own, but once you put it into the context of the tune, it doesn't. So definitely understand rhythmically what you have to work with, and definitely understand as far as the structure of what you're playing over what you have to work with. The only other thing you'd need is to define what your best notes are going to be. And that's really where everybody can differ, I think, the most, is choosing, exactly how many notes they want to play, how active do you want to be in the beginning of a solo. Yes. I think some of my favorite solos that I've ever heard start off with either no playing or very, very little playing in the beginning, because it gives you infinite room to develop.
And then the listener gets to ask, like, what's happening? Like, what's going to happen? Something, we know something's coming as a listener. When there's that break, we know they're going to hit us with something. Or if there's just one note that's being held out.
It's similar to a conversation. I often used to define it to my students as, okay, imagine I'm having a conversation with you, and then see, if you do that, the person's wondering what's next.
Right.
but it makes the point that if you can do that musically, you can play a couple notes and then hold one out, and the listener's actually going to wait to find out what is going to happen next. And if you're patient, you can really, really milk that to the point where they really want to know what your next note is, and your next note actually therefore has a lot of meaning when it happens. If you just play a whole lot of notes, you're just rambling. And so it's a little bit harder to actually keep the attention all the way through that way.
Thank you, Greg. Anthony, what do you have to add?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think silence is just as important, right? Especially if the whole band drops out and you're playing a solo in a band setting. Or if the band drops out and then just the soloist leads in, it's sort of like, okay, now we're welcoming this player. We're going to shine the light on them and support them. Yeah, I mean, similar to what Greg had said, I would consider the musical context, right? So I was thinking of 2 different, I guess, situations. One being like a jam session where I'd be improvising a solo over a specific chord progression, right? And for something like that, I'd really need to know the song. I'd need to know the structure of the song, the chord progression, the time signature, the song key, and understand which, what my options are. And then the next would be like composing a solo, with fellow songwriters at a songwriting session or recording session. If I were to consider the latter, it becomes a group project, and well, I guess it's a group project either way, but you're writing something together, and you want to understand what you're trying to express through this song that you're making together. And so that'll help that would help guide how I'd write a solo for the song. How do I want to express something that's happy versus sad? If I were to keep things simple, do I want to create some mystery? Is this am I going to be using an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar with specific effects? When you start to add those elements, it sort of complicates things. But I would consider the lyrical content as well. If it's a love song, I think there are so many different ways I could support a love song with a guitar solo. It just depends on the type of tone that I'd like to establish.
Right.
But I would right away consider those basic elements: the song key, the chord progressions at play, and I would just I might listen to a recording of the section that I might want to solo over, or ask other musicians to play or loop a section while I just experiment. I think trial and error is something that's always worked for me, and it also allows me the opportunity to think outside the box and just try other options that I might think that I think might not fit initially, and come to find that, wow, this actually colors this piece in a way I hadn't imagined.
Right.
So you can come up with little cool discoveries like that.
So I know in the world of writing, there's an old the concept of like kill your darlings, which is like if there's something that you've written and you're really precious about it and you love it and it makes you feel clever, get rid of it. You don't want, because that puts the focus on the author and not the writing. I feel like as a guitarist, you can take your darlings and just put them into a solo and be like, oh, look at this cool thing I can do. And then it's there and it's gone. And so are there any, like, do you have a sort of bag of tricks that you'll pull out for a solo? Maybe there's a technique that you have that you use one time and you love using it, and then it's there and it's gone and you don't hear it again.
Oh, sure. Oh,
I think we all have them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think anyone who does guitar solos has their bag of tricks that they know will work, which is why we have them.
Right.
Like it is funny when people talk about improvisation, because you're not really making it all up. Let's be frank here. You're using everything that you've played prior to that point, and you're taking ideas that will work and putting other things in between them.
Mm-hmm.
But those things that will work are your bag of tricks, and everybody's got their own things that they know will work, but the way you string them together is actually how you improvise.
It's like it's a part of our musical vocab, right?
Yeah,
it's just like a conversation.
It's like I guess because when you're improvising, you're not thinking about every individual note that you're about to play. You're thinking about shapes, more sentences than words or letters. I guess
you should never be thinking about what you're playing. That'd be a huge piece of advice. You should always think about what you're about to play.
Right.
Because otherwise you'll get tripped up at some point. You should always be a step ahead. It's actually the same as with reading music, is that you should never actually be and you know this, Doug, from the band work you've done in the past, is you should never actually be looking at the notes you're playing. You should always be looking ahead. You could even think about this as the note way in Rocksmith, is you actually see these notes coming at you. And it's the same way when you're improvising, is you want to think about where your solo is going, not really being focused on what you're playing in the moment. I will say there's this really cool point that sometimes people get to, and I've heard other people reach this kind of euphoric point. And it's happened to me at times over the years where I'm soloing, and after a while, I'm just listening. Where it turns into autopilot, and I become a listener. And that's like when I am totally in the zone, I just become a listener. which is really weird. I normally have my eyes closed, like unintentionally. I'm soloing and my eyes close, and I get to this point and I can just listen.
That seems like a good place to be.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say it's something that's happened often, but when it does, it's a very, very cool place to be musically.
Okay.
Very zen.
So let's, if you're able, take yourselves out of the mind space of a lead guitarist for a moment, and think about the other members of the band. If you know your lead player or rhythm player, if you know that you're about to have a guitar solo, how can you prepare yourself as a bassist, as a vocalist, as a rhythm player? How do you sort of make that space? If you're writing a song together and there's a spot that you want to have a guitar solo, how as a bassist or rhythm player do you not step aside, but maybe step back and leave room for the solo without diminishing yourself?
I'd say for I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, we'll start with Greg because you're talking.
I've been playing a fair amount of bass just in the last few days because I'm writing a new song, and I picked up my 5-string, and so it was very inspiring to do that. And I actually had to ponder the same thing, which was, okay, I've reached the solo section. How do I want to play to leave space for my guitar part, which obviously I can't play at the same time, so I can't even really understand what I'm going to play. I have to just kind of imagine the solo there.
I hope I'm going to play something cool. I hope I'm going to play something cool.
Right. Whatever I play here, it's going to be fine. Yeah, I'll figure it out. But I feel on bass, part of the mindset is you have to assume that your notes, if they get too high, would interfere with the solo. Not necessarily that the notes would be in the same range, but as the bass notes get higher, they actually also become more recognizable. And so for bass, if you stay in the lower octave the majority of the time, it actually would work to the advantage of the soloist to not interfere. The cool thing is you don't want to do that the whole time, because then, you don't really have much of a range to work with. But if you only creep up to the high notes every like 4th bar to kind of lead into the next 4 bars, assuming things are happening in like 4-bar cycles, then it actually works really well, because you can kind of creep up there and have a little bit of excitement up leading into what would be like bar 5, and then transition your way back down. And in doing so, the majority of the time you stay out of the way, but when you do kind of creep up, it adds some intensity to kind of keep the song moving forward into the next cycle of chords.
And I will say some of my favorite bass parts happen during guitar solos. It's because I can focus in on the bass a bit more, just because everything is a bit more separated in those moments a lot of times. And I think bassists can be a bit more free. I can't speak for rhythm players. Maybe Dan can later. He'll talk about not soloing next time we have him on. Anthony Martinez, anything that you would like to offer as far as making space for a solo?
Yeah, I think we can point to the favorite solos that we mentioned earlier in the stream. If I'm thinking about Killer Queen and Brian May's solo during the verse section, it's just piano, some light percussion, and Brian May's guitar. That's all it is. And then eventually the entire band comes in afterwards to elevate the solo. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's a very good example of a band setting up a soloist and then helping them reach that point.
Right.
That climax later on. But you also have Tornado of Souls, right? Where the band is playing pretty much the same thing the entire time, and they're leaning on the soloist to take the listener to a different place, and tell their story over the course of a minute, by the way, which is very difficult to do.
It's a long solo.
yeah. But then at that point, it really puts pressure on the soloist to make things interesting and build things up, write your story. But I think it depends. If I were in a jam situation, I think my first inclination would be to lay back and just listen, especially if I'm playing with musicians that I'm not really familiar with.
Sure.
Because don't really know what their playing preferences or styles are, I would just listen and then try to support a fun conversation.
And then, I assume, if you kept working with that group, if you kept working on that song, you could develop that out a bit more and see what complements what you expect that solo to be each time. So you get those highlights.
Yeah, and then if you're writing a song together, and maybe you're crafting a solo with other musicians, then you can get really creative and compose like hits or stops,
right,
to emphasize certain pockets of the solo.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect too. It depends on how.
And real quick, let's just in case, let's define, let's explain what you mean by that. So we're talking solos going, rhythms pulled back, bass is pulled back, drums pulled back a little bit maybe, but then during the solo, everybody comes back in either in unison or in some other way, rhythmically or melodically, to be together, unified. And then everybody breaks back out and the soloist can continue on with their solo. Is that a fair description of what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just really pointing to the fact that you can structure a solo with a group of musicians and like compose it together so that the entire band participates. And it's just another way to maybe highlight different parts of the solo, like hits. If say there are a couple of unison bends, that are part of a solo, and then at that point you might hear some horns, horns go off, or solid drum hits to complement those parts of the solo. That's another approach.
Okay, so almost like they're embellishing the solo a little bit, which is fun. It's a fun kind of group work. I got a couple of questions. Got a few questions from the chat that I want to get through before I let you go. Do you have meetings that I need to let you go for? And my video is apparently frozen, but I will continue. I'll continue asking. You can look at whatever face I'm making. Anthony and Greg, do you have a couple extra minutes?
Sure. Yeah, man.
Okay, great. So Jean 308 wants to know, on the note that we were talking about earlier, what do you think about solos that do only use one note, or would only use one note? Is that a silly thing, or is that genius, or does it depend?
I'd say it depends. I mean, I'd want to understand what the context is. I think you can get really creative too, especially if if the soloist takes a rhythmic approach, mixes things up a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends. What are your thoughts, Greg?
I think it's actually fine to do that. It wouldn't necessarily be a bad solo, but you would be at that point entirely relying upon your rhythm. Because the note you choose and the rhythm you play it with are your two main elements to work with. So at that point, if you're not being rhythmically creative, you're going to have a problem. But let me say this: if you did do that approach, and then you did choose to change your note, that would be incredibly impactful. If you played one note for a long time and then kind of the listeners now just, again, it's all about what you're giving the listener, and the listener is that now just expecting to hear that note. And the minute that you actually take that note and you change it, that holds so much value, because you've just been convincing them that it's not going to happen, and then it does.
It's all about interesting decisions, interesting choices.
Right. And what if you were to change things up by adding a pinch harmonic to that same note, or hammering onto the note? I know that you're introducing another note, but the focus is still on that pitch, right?
And it's not necessarily a solo, but I'm thinking about Dashboard by Modest Mouse, where it's a very, for the most part, through the verses, the part is very, very simple. It's just a couple of notes, but they have so much fun with the switching between clean notes and fret, hand mute, palm mute, harmonics, rhythmically within that variation. It's so fun to play, even though it's mostly just a couple of notes.
I have a great song that actually goes right along that, and it's actually one of my favorite I'll say evolutions of an interlude, because I don't think I'd call it a solo, is
Sure.
King Crimson's Starless. There's a break in the middle of the song that goes just to bass. By the way, and some very interesting time signatures, but a really, really cool bass line in it for anyone that is familiar with this song by King Crimson. And then Robert Fripp plays 2 notes in repetition over it. And then it starts gradually to move up chromatically as the interlude continues, and it grows from nothing into this like beast of a sound where it just starts on these 2 little notes going back and forth, and then the drive picks up and the tones go up. It's absolutely beautiful the way they do it. It's just really, really intense. Starless by King Crimson. It's really awesome how they do it.
Well, thank you very much. A couple more quick questions from the chat. Tonewolf FFIO asks, it says, an often overlooked feature of the game is the fingered or picked for bass. What is the difference between when a song is considered fingered or picked? Is that just the sound? I know that we tend to go by whether the bassist in question uses a pick or finger, but why would you use one or the other?
Yeah, I think it comes down to playing style and preference, and what in this case, in the case of Rocksmith, how the bassist in the band actually performed the arrangement. But if you were to pick bass as opposed to playing with your fingers, you would absolutely produce a different sound, and altogether. But yeah, that's, I think, the main difference in the game. If you see a bass arrangement as fingered, that means that the original bassist used their fingers to pick, versus a pick.
And then one more. We'll start with Greg for this. This one is from Francois Luong SF. Hey, Francois.
Hey, Francois.
What's happening?
Are there any other songs that you came to love specifically through note tracking?
Ooh,
It's on the spot. It's a good one.
It is. Honestly, I'm gonna have to fall back to West Coast Blues, because that's a song I kind of forgot about. That Wes Montgomery tune, and I definitely studied it in college when studying jazz, and I think I probably learned at least a portion of it. But then after kind of going through the game with it, it really just made me remember why it's such a good solo. And also Les Paul's On the Sunny Side of the Street, which I did not know that much, and then gained a totally new respect for that playing, because I was unfamiliar and I note tracked it, and I was like, whoa, this is a lot going on right here.
There's a lot going on in this.
Very cool solo there. So that would be one where I definitely gained some respect for that tune.
Anthony Martinez, same question.
Yeah. I think actually an artist I discovered through note tracking was Biffy Clyro, and I'm a fan of all of the songs that we released by that band. Just an amazing group. I had the opportunity to see them at the Fillmore fairly recently. And this is a band that sells out stadiums in the UK, and they come to SF, they play at the Fillmore, and they just put on an amazing show. They're fantastic musicians and great songwriters too. There's some pretty awesome guitar work in the Biffy Clyro pack, and I believe the lead vocalist who plays guitar in the band is also a violinist. So his approach to songwriting is very interesting and more melodic.
Right.
But really, really great guitar work, and I'm a big fan of that band.
Right. Well, thank you both very much. We're about time to wrap. It's about time to wrap up. Again, thank you very much for being here, talking about solos, answering questions from the chat, and hopefully we'll see you back on here very soon. Say goodbye to Anthony Martinez and Greg Studley, everyone.
Thanks, Doug.
And see you. Thanks for having us.
See ya. And to everybody in the chat, it is time for our final raffle of the day. So if you are in the chat live, please look once more to UbiJurassic for instructions on how you can win the second Ernie Ball prize pack of the day. Once again, we will be shipping these out once we are back in the studio. We do not have a timeline for that, but we are saving your information so that when we are able to ship them out, we can get them out hopefully within a couple of days. Of course, the longer we're at home, the longer it'll take to get them all out, but we'll get them out for you as soon as we can. If you win, you're going to get everything that you see here: 2 sets of guitar strings, a strap from Ernie Ball, a peg winder from Ernie Ball, a package of Wonder Wipes, 12 picks from Ernie Ball, plus 3 picks from us here at Rocksmith. We will ship internationally. Just make sure you split up your name, split up your address line by line to make it easy. You will receive a whisper if you win from UbiVertigo. He will get your name, your shipping address, and your telephone number. We do need all of that information in order to get your prize to you when we are able to ship them out. I want to say thank you once more to Greg Studley and Anthony Martinez for being here on chat with me. Thank you to Dan Amrick for running the board behind the scenes, and thank you to Brian Turner very much for helping moderate the chat, for handling the raffles, and for creating a segment for this week. It's very good to see you on the stream. And everybody else in the chat, thank you for being here, and we will see you very soon.